anytime between now and when the rest of this process goes in. So at this point, we're looking at having the final drafts of the general plan update itself and the associated EIR will be made public sometime in January, no later than the end of January. And it's very likely that we will be, well, I guess there'd be a question of whether you have appreciated or not the presenting them first and just kind of walking through what's there. In this case, it would also be talking about what kind of comments were received and how they were worked through, and that would kick off the future public comment period on that final draft. So unless we hear that you'd like to try something else, we will schedule some sort of a presentation on that, simply to say, here's the document, here's how we got it, and here's, here's what we kind of went through to get to this point. So that's one consideration. Once it's publicized then, or publicly released, you've got more public comment period. You will have then the Planning Commission having one or more sessions of a very formal public hearing. And I guess from the consultants, I would appreciate the work of the Planning Commission then. This time they heard everything. Do they need to actually make a recommendation or take some action when they then pass it on to the Board of Supervisors, or is it more public comment and listening but not taking action?
I believe the short answer is yes, you would be asking the Planning Commission to be making a recommendation to forward it to the Board of Supervisors based on their input in whatever form that may take.
Okay. So,
And now, actually, to clarify, that would be both on the general plan and certification of the EIR. You are the decision-making body that gets to certify the EIR.
okay, so the Planning Commission would hold their hearings and discussions, and based on that, be making recommendations to you as the final body. And then the expectation that this will come to you in March as final document with the recommendations of the Planning Commission, and at that point you would be certifying the final EIR and adopting the general plan update. In your review period, in the past, you've expressed interest in particular looking at the action steps or the implementation measures. And this is actually true not only for general plan, but also for the other planning processes, including Ukiah Valley Area Plan. And there is money budgeted to do a cost analysis of the implementation measures. Again, that was something that you asked for earlier because you felt that it was important to know both to guide budgeting as well as to be aware of what the implications were. It's kind of like a economic impact, if you will, analysis of the action steps that you would be adopting in the final general plan. So how you want to go through that, if it's something that you want to look at as individuals, you can. If it's something that you would like us to schedule some work sessions for you to review it or whatever, that's something that you can tell us in the future, but I'm kind of laying it out now because there's going to be a level of detail that heretofore you haven't dealt with, and that will be germane to your adoption of the final plan. The other thing I kind of pulled out of the discussion of the land use requests, the amendments, and I guess I'd just remind you that that's a somewhat unusual process, and it's kind of weird as we go through these discussions because we're kind of talking policy on the one hand, and then we're talking very specific land use on the other. And that's an artifact of how long the general plan has been in process, and the fact that there was a backlog of general plan amendments, and as a board you felt like, okay, we need to deal with these rather than telling people, no, you've got to wait another couple of years, as long as it doesn't require its own EIR, as long as a land use request is generally compatible with the general plan update. So it's a somewhat awkward process, and that's why we're trying to keep this update going to remind you, okay, this is how we got to this point. And in the end, I think it will make sense. But certainly as we go along, it's a very specific piece of information or a series of specific pieces of information in a more general policy document. And that's why it's somewhat awkward moving back and forth between the two items. But one key in that seems to be the issue of non-conforming uses of land, and then the island issue. You've heard that a number of times, and I don't know that that characterizes all of the land use requests that are in the the EIR alternative as opposed to the project alternative, but it certainly seems to characterize a number of them. And so that would be something that I would think we'd want to look at, in more of a policy, from more of a policy standpoint, is how do you deal with non-conforming uses? Do you just kind of roll them along or grandfather them in or ignore them or whatever? And this, as you know, is not the first place where non-conforming uses have come up, and then the whole concept of islands. So that seems to be something that I would draw out of the input that's been received on the land use request. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the mitigation measures and action steps and the financial analysis of those, and let you know that that information will be part of the final packet that comes